Already, so for this video, we're gonna read a paper from Hacker News to help us learn better. So we're learning to learn better, wow. And basically, the title says that increasing retention without increasing study time. I mean, I don't think a secret sauce exists. Sometimes you just have to go through it, but maybe we can fish something out of this paper. It's really short, so that's why I chose it. We'll see what happens. Alright, before that, we're gonna do the ritual. Dance class is on. King Julian. Okay. Love how Ring was like that. Alright. That's for the dance part. Now we can move to the paper. So, increasing retention without increasing study time. I may make this bigger. Also check myself. Maybe a little bit too big. Yeah, I think it's fine. But just oh god. Why am I doing this to myself? Alright, perfect. Alright. Increasing retention without increasing study time by Doug Rohrer and Hal Pashler. So let's just do a little bit of background check. Faculty of Psychology, University of South Florida. Good H-index. I'm not sure about H-index in psychology. So, psychology PhD, of course, he's working in the faculty. But let's just check out the other author, Hal Pashler, University of California, he might be the advisor of the other one. What I'm thinking, he might be the advisor of the South Florida University Professor Doug Rohrer. Dr. Pashler's research interests are learning and memory, attention, and higher-level visual perception. His focus in recent years is factors that may increase the efficiency. I like how they write may. You never know. You never know. May increase the efficiency of learning, from acquisition of facts, vocabulary, and concepts to the distinction between subtle different visual patterns. Dr. Pashler is also interested in all aspects of selective and divided attention, including visual awareness and processing bottlenecks. Finally, Dr. Pashler is involved in a variety of efforts to promote greater replicability of psychological and neuroimaging research, as well as greater responsibility in reporting results in these areas. Alright, good enough. So, this paper is probably the juice of these two guys' work. So it's like that's syrup. A serum? Anyways. Abstract. Because people forget much of what they learn, students could benefit from learning strategies that provide long-lasting knowledge. Yet surprisingly little is known about how long-term retention is most efficiently achieved. Here we examine how retention is affected by two variables, the duration of a study session and the temporal distribution of study time across multiple sessions. Temporal. relating to time, relating to worldly as opposed to spiritual affairs. Okay. The timely manner that they study. Our results suggest that a single session devoted to the study of some material should continue long enough to ensure that mastery is achieved, but that immediate further study of the same material is an efficient use of time. Our data also show that the benefit of distributing a fixed amount of study time across two study sessions, the spacing effect, depends jointly on the interval between study sessions and the interval between study and test. We discussed the practical implications of both findings, especially in regard to mathematics learning. Alright, so some hardcore stuff. They probably asked some undergrads to do calculus. Alright, some notes here. Just paperwork, I guess. Although most people have spent thousands of hours in the classroom, the result of this effort is often surprisingly disappointing. Indeed, both the popular press and the academic literature are replete with examples of educational failure among students and recent graduates. In one assessment of US 8th graders, only 50% were able to correctly multiply -5 and -7. Wow. 50%. And a recent survey of young adults in the US revealed that most could not select the continent in which Sudan is located. While such findings are partly explained by the fact that some students never learned the information in the first place, we believe that forgetting is often the cause. For this reason, it seems important to define learning strategies that can promote long-lasting retention. Yet surprisingly little is known about the long-term effectiveness of most learning strategies. For this reason, we have been conducting learning experiments in which subjects are tested as much as 1 year after the final study session. In a further nod to ecological validity, our subjects learn the kinds of material that people often try to learn, such as vocabulary, geography, foreign language, and mathematics. In this review, we focus on two decisions that all learners face. How long should one study the same material before quitting or shifting to different material? And how should a fixed amount of study time be distributed across study sessions? 1 second. Let me just double check something. A little bit in the corner, but it's still. See. I feel like this should be fine as long as I'm scrolling up. Yep. Overlearning. When learners choose to devote an uninterrupted period of time to learning some material or skill, they must decide when to quit, regardless of whether they later return to the same material. For example, once a student has cycled through a list of vocabulary words until each definition has been correctly recalled exactly one time, the student must decide whether to cycle again through the same list. The continuation of a study immediately after the student has achieved error-free performance is known as overlearning. Many educators argue that overlearning is an effective way to boost long-term retention, and overlearning appears to be quite common in schools. In mathematics course, for instance, assignments typically include many problems of the same kind, thereby ensuring that students devote much of their study time to overlearning. Does overlearning produce long-lasting benefits? At first glance, the heavy reliance on overlearning might be seen as consistent with the result of nearly 80 years of empirical literature. In these experiments, subjects either quit or continued studying after some criterion was reached, and the additional study typically boosted subsequent test performance. Yet a closer examination of the literature led us to wonder whether the benefits of overlearning might be short-lived. In most overlearning studies, the test was given within a week of the study session, and in many cases within an hour, to determine how the benefits of overlearning hold up over meaningful periods of time. We have been measuring the effects of overlearning after various retention intervals. The interval between study and test, for example, in the the interval between study and test. For example, in one of our experiments, subjects learned vocabulary by cycling through a list of word definition pairs by repeatedly testing themselves. Cicatrix, that translates to scar, I believe, as one would with flashcards. They complete either 5 learning trials, adequate learning, or 10 learning trials, overlearning. Adequate learners generally had no more than one perfect study trial, whereas most overlearners achieved at least 3 perfect trials. Subjects were tested either 1 or 4 weeks later, as shown in Figure 1. Overlearning provided noticeable gains at 1 week, but these gains were almost undetectable after 4 weeks. Other studies of ours have confirmed this pattern of declining overlearning benefits, although the length of time over which gains remain detectable varies with the details of the produce. In summary, then, we see that while overlearning often increases performance for a short while, the benefit diminishes sharply over time. Wow. So these guys did 5 cycles, these guys did 10, and after 4 weeks they get the same result. Overlearning, that's Figure 1. Implications. In thinking through the practical implications of our overlearning results, it probably makes sense to focus on the relative efficiency of overlearning versus alternative strategies, because overlearning requires more study time than not overlearning. Yes. The critical question is how the benefits of overlearning compare to the benefits resulting from some alternative use of the same period. As we will see in the second part of this paper, it seems very likely that devoting this study time to the Alright, so the critical question is how the benefits of overlearning compare to the benefits resulting from some alternative use of the same time period. As we will see in the second part of this paper, it seems very likely that devoting this study time to the review of materials studied weeks, months, or even years earlier will typically pay for greater dividends than the continued study of material learned just a moment ago. In essence, overlearning simply provides very little bang for the buck, as each additional unit of uninterrupted study time provides an ever smaller return on the investment of study time. We hope it is clear that in questioning the utility of overlearning, we are not suggesting that students reduce their study time, nor are we disparaging the use of drill and practice. Rather, we question the wisdom of providing continued practice on material right after error-free performance has been achieved. There are, however, situations in which overlearning is desirable. For instance, overlearning appears to be effective on the short term and therefore might be a fine choice for learners who do not seek long-term retention. In addition, there are situations in which an error or even a delayed response might have dire consequences. Say, emergency routines performed by pilots, soldiers, or nurses, and here overlearning is probably advisable and perhaps even necessary. Overlearning speaks to one aspect of the broader question of how distribution of study time affects learning. This area has been the focus of research for more than a century. In most research on this topic, a fixed amount of study time is divided across 2 sessions that are separated by an inter-session interval, ISI. If the ISI equals 0, study time is said to be masked. Importantly, the retention interval is always measured from the second study session. When tested later, performance is usually much better if the study time is spaced rather than masked, a finding known as the spacing effect. There are numerous theoretical explanations for the spacing effect, but these are beyond the scope of this article. While the superiority of spacing over massing is well established, less is known about how far apart the study sessions should be spaced to promote long-term retention. For instance, does the duration of the intersession interval affect memory, and if so, how? We have begun to seek answers to these questions with experiments using long retention intervals. Varying the intersession interval. In our first set of spacing experiments, we varied this intersession interval, separating the two study sessions, and the retention interval was fixed. In the first of these studies, students studied Swahili English pairs. The ISI ranged from 5 minutes to 14 days, and the RI was 10 days. Alright. Retention interval. Retention interval. Alright, was 10 days. So they checked after 10 days how many days. They checked after days how many pairs the students probably remember. ISI had a very large effect on final test recall, with the 1 day ISI yielding the best recall, figure 2. In the second experiment, in which subjects learned the names of some obscure objects, we used the 6 months RI and varied ISI from 5 minutes to 6 months. Effects were even bigger than in the first step, but the optimal ISI was roughly 1 month. Oh wow. Interesting. So this is the 6 months test, that's the 10 months test. And then for 10 days, you have 1 day being the best. For 6 months, if you study 1 month separated, you get the best. So around 1/6, 1/10, you can argue. So, so is ISI repeating or is it a one-time thing? So like you have 2 study sessions, 2 sessions, yeah. So if you study once and you study 1 day later, you get the best result. And for the 10 days later, so it needs to be close. And then for 6 months, you're gonna, yeah, okay, yeah. The interaction of the ISI and the RI. In comparing the results of the two experiments just described, one sees the increase in RI from 10 days to 6 months resulted in an increase in the optimal ISI from about 1 day to about 1 month. The results are consistent with an idea that has long been suspected based on studies with short time intervals, that the optimal ISI varies with the RI. To assess this possibility within a single experiment, we are currently conducting a web-based experiment in which we simultaneously vary both ISI up to 15 weeks and RI as long as 15 weeks. Preliminary results from about 1,300 subjects indicate that the optimal ISI is indeed varying as expected with RI, with the optimal ISI lying at the value of roughly 10 to 30% of the RI. Oh wow. So if you have a test that's coming in a week, you study at the beginning of the week, and next time you should be studying, if you have only 1 study session, is 1/10 of the 7. Let's say you have 10 days. make it easier. So it's between you studied first day, then you study probably second or third, then you get your best result. The character of this rather intriguing interaction of between, but this is only if you have two intervals, right? If you could keep studying, that's a different argument. But for now, if you have two, you want to have that second one happening in about 1/10 to the uh, retention interval when you have your test or something. Right. The character of this rather intriguing interaction between ISI and RI is illustrated by the hypothetical surface in figure 3. Here the vertical axis shows the final test score with the two axes representing ISI and RI. Three features are noteworthy. First, for any value of ISI, an increasing in RI brings descending performance. Alright, the expected forgetting curve second. For any value of RI, an increasing in ISI causes test score to first increase and then decrease, like the non-monotonic function in figure 2. Third, as RI is increased, optimal ISI increases as well, generating a mountain ridge that moves gradually outward from the RI axis. So if you just do 0, 0, you get 100, and then you have this little thing, and this probably is the 10-20% they're talking about. Yep. Okay. Hypothetical interaction between ISI and RI. Final test score is shown as a function of intersession interval and retention interval. For any value of ISI, an instance in RI causes test scores to decline monotonically. For any value of RI, an increase in ISI causes test score to first increase and then decrease. The optimal ISI values, which lie along the mountain ridge of the surface, increase as RI increases, producing a mountain ridge that moves gradually outward from the RI axis. Alright, implications. Our experiments demonstrate that powerful spacing effects occur over practically meaningful time periods. Furthermore, final test performance depends heavily on the duration of the spacing gap, with too brief gaps causing poorer performance than excessively long gaps. Moreover, spacing effects generally seem to get bigger, not smaller. When one examines longer term retention, the results have widespread implications for instruction at many levels, of which we will offer just a few examples. Many elementary and middle school teachers present a different set of spelling or vocabulary words each week, but their students might be far better served if material was distributed sporadically across many months. At the college level, instructors often fail to give cumulative final exams, which are likely to induce re-study of material. In the realm of lifelong learning, immersion-style foreign language courses are popular, yet their brevity, which prevents sufficient spacing, should produce deceptively high initial levels of learning, followed by rapid forgetting. Mathematics learning. Because the experiments described thus far require subjects to learn concrete facts, it is natural to wonder whether the results of these studies will generate to tasks requiring more abstract kinds of learning. To begin to explore this question, we have been assessing the effects of overlearning and spacing in mathematics learning. For example, in one experiment, students were taught a permutation task and then assigned either 3 or 9 practice problems. The additional 6 problems, which ensured heavy overlaying, had no detectable effect on test score after 1 or 4 weeks. In another experiment with the same task, a group of spacers divided 4 practice problems across 2 sessions by 1 week, whereas a group of massers worked the same 4 problems in one session. When tested 1 week later, the spacers outscored the masters 74% to 49%. Furthermore, the masters did not reliably outsource a group of so-called light masters who worked only half as many problems as the masters. This apparent ineffectiveness of overlearning and massing is troubling because these two strategies are fostered by most mathematics textbooks. In these texts, each of practice problems consists almost entirely of problems relating solely to the immediately preceding material. The concentration of all similar problems into the same practice set constitutes massing, and the sheer number of similar problems within each practice set guarantees overlearning. Alternatively, mathematics textbooks could easily adopt a format that engenders spacing. With this shuffled format, practice problems relating to a given lesson would be distributed throughout the remainder of the textbook. For example, a lesson on parabolas would be followed by a practice set with the usual number of problems, but only a few of these problems would relate to parabolas. Other parabola problems would be distributed throughout the remaining practice sets. The shuffled format not only provides a space-temporal distribution, but also confronts the learner with a variety of problem types within each set, which may itself enhance learning. With the standard format, learning under the one sample t-test, for example, is followed by nothing but one sample t-test problems. This provides no discrimination learning to help students determine which features of a problem indicate the appropriate choice of procedure. With the shuffle format, however, problem types are mixed, and students must learn how to find the appropriate strategy for each problem. This benefit seems to be independent of the temporal spacing effect. The bigger picture. Although this brief review has focused on the optimal timing and duration of study, there are of course many other decisions learners must take. For example, when preparing for an exam, should students self-test before seeing the answer, or it is more effective to re-study the answer? A sizable body of evidence suggests that retrieval practice is usually a wise strategy, with the caveat that learners receive the correct answer after an error. Oddly, these kinds of practical questions have mostly been ignored by experimental psychologists over the years. Although Harry Barrick and Robert Bjork are two notable exceptions. Happily, however, there has been a resurgence of interest in this domain in the last few years, and efforts are underway in various places to try to call the empirical research for simple concrete principles that can be communicated directly to learners and teachers. Research of this sort should also have spin-offs for educational software. For example, although computer-based instruction typically provides extensive retrieval practice and rapid feedback, it offers a currently unexploited opportunity to schedule study sessions in ways that optimize long-term retention. The various developments currently underway should all help to bring us closer to the time when educational practice will rely chiefly on empirical evidence rather than on the combination of tradition and facts upon which it has mostly been relying in the past. So there are some recommended readings on learning and memory retention and all that. But it's my personal take on this, It all depends, man. It all depends. It's like, it's all about how much you care about something. And then you could say if you care about something that you want to learn, then you should probably keep repeating it so you learn it. That's one thing. But to go the other way, highly doubted that it will work. That you do not like it, you do not engage with it, it's a language you're never gonna speak. So there's that. But I feel like the assumption here is that you want to learn that subject, and also you want that, so there is no motivation issue. And also you're only tested, so you're not using that thing in project. See, the thing with building a project is that you have to keep coming back to it, because a project cannot just be like done in one day. So that's why you hear that a lot of students just want to build projects instead of just getting the grades. And that's what more interesting is, the process of building, the creative process. And overlearning, it makes a lot of sense. I don't remember anything from calculus 2. Yeah, I remember some integral. Never forget the plus c plus constant, but uh, you should have some kind of ownership on it. You should have some closeness, something that when you wake up, you're like this. Because, okay, so for example, I will give this example. If you're like that with calculus, you will be Richard Feynman, because apparently Richard Feynman did that, and his wife was complaining that he wakes up and he's thinking calculus, and he's driving and he's thinking calculus, and this and that. So if you're like that, that works. And if you have something else that you want to care about, this works. You just have to keep it steady and keep going back. So reflect on what you learn, care about what you learn, organize what you learn, and I feel like that's just the learning process. Yeah. Alright, so that's it for this video. I hope I can get one more video out of today, but we will see what happens.